I think that it's quite possible that by the early months of 2025, we'll see global equity markets, or most of them, falling by around 40%. Global tensions are rising with a real risk that by the end of September, there will be a breakout of war between NATO and Russia.
The one and only Simon Hunt. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, Simon, for those
even though it's 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, the honor is all mine. So, thank you so much for waking up super early. I understand you woke up at 3:30 a.m. just to make this interview. So, super appreciative of you here. Right, go Simon, go in the comments, guys. Simon's a champ. Simon, for those who may not know who you are, give us a little bit of an introduction of yourself. For the one or two out there who may not know.
Where do I start? I grew up in the copper industry because my father was involved in it in Central Africa. I worked for two of the large mining companies. I then went into the city of London, and before I had any gray hairs, decided I wanted to branch off on my own. And with a mining engineer, we set up Brook Hunt and Associates. And 20 years later, it had got too big and successful, and decided to leave and set up my current shop, which is Simon Hunt Strategic Services, where you can see me on simon-hunt.com, where I focus on the metals industry, the world's economy, China in particular, and the interface of economic activity and geopolitics, because it's the latter which is starting to really define the way that the world is going to progress. So in a brief nutshell, that's my background.
Understood. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. What is kind of like your 65,000 foot view of the world economy at this very moment in time? Kind of broad strokes, if you will.
Contrary to most analysts, the global economy is on the verge of recession, starting in the USA. Activity is weakening in Europe. Activity in China is soft. But against that, we've got the interplay of geopolitics. What we see evolving is the long-held view of America to dismember Russia to gain control of its natural resources. And at the same time, the evolvement of the BRICS group of nations and how they are developing a separate trade and currency platform has started to alarm policymakers in Washington. Because if the BRICS is successful in launching what they call the unit, then it's the beginning of the end of America's hegemony and the domination of the dollar, and thus America's ability to mold the world into the way it wants. So that's basically a quick overview standing on the 29th floor where I live.
Not almost 65,000 feet, I presume. Like the basis of the question.
Your math is better than mine.
Yeah. Well, what does that portend to the precious metals market, considering gold's role in things like the currency reset, the BRICS countries looking to enforce de-dollarization over time. Granted, we may still be early into the tooth of this de-dollarization, or maybe not. You kind of steer us in that direction. But what is the role of gold and even silver when kind of in these currency resets?
Gold represents true value. If you go back to as far back as you want to and relate gold to any counterparty you want, its value remains constant. So what we're seeing in the big rise in gold prices is an expression of the fear that the global system is failing and possibly may even collapse. It's the safety valve. But at the same time, BRICS's new currency unit, which is called the unit, will be backed 40% by gold and 60% by the currencies of its member countries. The member countries now comprise 10, but probably within 3 years, it will be as many as 50. So at the moment, the member countries account for 38% of global GDP, but in about 3 years' time, it'll be well over 50%. So you can, in very simple maths, you can say that 38% of global GDP, i.e. around $40 trillion, will no longer be using the dollar. Take that up in a couple of years' time to over 50%, and that's going to be $50 to $60 trillion that won't be using the dollar. So this is what America fears, and why I think they will use every trick in their toolbox to stop it from happening, even if it means war. And I think these are the real reasons why, in Europe anyway, that having lost the war in Ukraine, which is very probable, the attention is switching to how can we attack Russia. And in the Middle East, Israel has been used by America and the UK as their, how do I call it, as their base for helping to control their influence in the Middle East. That is at risk. What's happening now is, I think there's a 50-50 chance that a peace proposal is being worked out for a hostage and ceasefire arrangement, which, if all goes well, Netanyahu will announce in his presentation to the joint houses in Washington in July. It will be sold as a permanent deal. The probability is that it won't last throughout 2025, it will have done its job for domestic politics in America and domestic politics in Israel. However, the focus is turning towards attacking Hezbollah. America doesn't want to see that, publicly anyway. Iran has been a restraining influence, but Israel sees it as a threat to its existence. Some 60 to 80,000 residents along the northern border have had to be relocated elsewhere in Israel. So it's a territory you could almost say has been taken over by Hezbollah. So I think the risk of a full-scale attack against Hezbollah, who are well prepared, will take place by the end of this year. So what we're seeing geopolitically is a time bomb that is about to explode. And I think that we should, well, first of all, let me say straight away that although from our sources, NATO has actually taken decisions for an attack on Russia, at a meeting in early May between NATO and government representatives, the NATO guys suggested to the government representatives that they should encourage their population to stockpile essentials like food. From Russia's point of view, obviously they are fully aware of the risks of attack, have prepared themselves. And interestingly, they are setting up in friendly countries, giving them the ability to attack American assets wherever they might be, such as in Iraq by arming the Iraqis so that they can attack American bases. And probably we'll see it in Asia as well. And it wouldn't surprise me if there is a sudden implosion in Ukraine, i.e., a rapid defeat of the Ukrainian army, then the focus may well switch to the Pacific, to goading China into some form of attack on Taiwan. But if you look at what's happening in the South China Seas between the Philippines and China, you can see tensions are rising. So what we're basically saying is global tensions are rising with a real risk that by the end of September, there will be a breakout of war between NATO and Russia. What's then going to be the implications for financial markets? Has to be quite severe. Has the market really taken up the risks of war? I doubt it. The global financial system is pretty fragile. Um, there is a risk that you will see any sharp correction in equity markets and further rise in bond markets because of a war scenario, that certain banks are liable to fail. And as you can see, just the last couple of days, the fifth largest bank in Japan is being forced to liquidate its portfolio of American and European bonds. So, what do we see for the second half of the year? Big correction in global equity markets, bond markets remaining firm, rates remaining, sorry, rephrase that, rates remaining firm, bonds under downward pressure, likelihood of recession globally, and on top of which, the risk of war. So I think that it's quite possible that by the early months of 2025, we'll see global equity markets, or most of them, falling by around 40%. So you have a new government in America, new governments in Europe and the UK. There will then be a calibrated stimulus, fiscal and monetary, which will lead to a very inflationary-led recovery, with the dollar beginning to fall seriously, inflation taking off. So from equity markets falling sharply into the early months of 2025, and likewise base metal markets, then with all the stimuli which will be prodded into the global system, then we have the final takeoff, with equity markets about doubling in the space of 18 to 24 months. Likewise, base metal prices from their lows in early 2025. All seems hunky-dory, except that inflation has taken off. US inflation around 13%, global inflation around 15%. What do the bond vigilantes then say? Horrible. So we see, taking US 10-year treasuries as an example, we'll see them yielding by mid-2027 over 10%. What will that do to the global economy, which is highly leveraged? It will crash it. So then what follows will be 5 odd years of either depression or rolling recessions, when asset values other than gold and silver will collapse. So happy days ahead.
So you alluded to a new government being formed in the United States in the coming year, given the elections in November. The odds currently have Trump ahead of Biden at this very moment. Is there any substantial difference that Trump can make relative to Biden? He does seem to have a different position when it comes to Ukraine, but I kind of get the sense that you would kind of see the movement of the theater of war going from Europe to the Pacific under Trump, and probably in the Middle East as well. Is that kind of your assessment too?
I think that Trump will try and bring about peace with Russia. He will be more aggressive against China. The problem is Russia and China are now joined at the hip. And if the aggression against China led to conflict, Russia will be behind China, just as China is behind Russia. Not so much openly, but it's there through providing Russia with equipment, etc., etc., etc.
So have we started to see war being priced in? You said that you in your opinion, we haven't begun to see war being priced into the markets yet. But I'm looking at a rally in oil for last week. We went down. We went from the lower 70s all the way up to the lower 80s, $10 swing. Is that significant to anything, or is that just noise?
I think it's noise, frankly. Quite obviously, the Biden administration would like to see falling gasoline prices for the summer. So that may override any potential risks to oil supplies over the short period.
Okay. And so you mentioned gold and silver being the recipients of a big inflationary move towards 2025. Um, what about any other commodities that you can think of?
I think, I mean, a lot of people are very bullish, for instance, on copper. They talk about EVs, the green economy, data centers, etc., etc. But what does really drive copper consumption? It's the macroeconomy. And if you get financial and geopolitical hits to the economy, I think that the bullishness on data centers, AI, etc., will be lost in the sense of corporates and households looking for survival. So capital expenditure will fall. And a lot of these projects, I think, will be put on hold. So to follow my economic scenario, we're not really going to see the data centers, wind and solar, etc., all the green economy stuff, not coming to fruition until towards 2030. And I think that anyway, that practicality will override the optimism of people pushing wind and solar and EVs. It's much more likely that we will see a return to demand for fossil fuels. Wind and solar have their uses, but they cannot be the bulwark of your grid system. Weather conditions are volatile. EVs, there is a consumer resistance. EV sales everywhere are slowing down, even in China. So what will emerge during the difficult years will be much more a return to basics, which means not growth being driven by debt, but growth being driven by productivity.
Gotcha.
What is it taking? It's taking, for every 1% of growth in America, it's taking 1.7 units of debt. Is that sustainable? No.
It's not like the 80s anymore, where they could hike interest rates all the way up to 15%. But you have
Yeah,
this age of abundance where it was easy to extract these minerals and commodities.
yeah,
And you'd have this big, huge debt overhang as well.
yeah.
So I had Alistair McLeod on the show a week ago, and he basically said that Russia, one way Russia could basically end this war is to essentially adopt a gold standard, and that would destroy the dollar, for lack of a better term. Do you agree with that assessment? Is the dollar just one Russian gold standard or one Chinese gold standard away from dissolution?
I think that by the early 2030s, the dollar's value will be halved. If you take the dollar index, which is now around 105, it will probably be 50 by 2030.
And that's, yeah, so the DXY, so relative to other currencies.
Yep. Yeah, but the other currencies are only rising as a reflection of the falling dollar. I mean, all fiat currencies in real terms will be collapsing, which is why gold retains its value.
And so, why is it that when you go to countries like Turkey, and you go to countries like Argentina, countries with high amounts of inflation, why do they seek out dollars and not gold or silver typically? Like
Because
the general
they need the dollars to repay their debt. This is another war that's going on, in that Russia and China are offering to developing countries, including Turkey, come join us, and you can get rid of your debt, and we will refinance it. What is also happening on the American side is that they are going around offering low interest, easy credit. I know one country that's renegotiating its debt, and this is what is being offered to them by the IMF / World Bank, which is basically America. So there is behind the scenes this financial war going on. Who's going to win? I think there will be, I think the Western world has come into this game too late, misunderstood what BRICS was up to, and now is running scared that they will lose their dominant role in the world. If you look at how successful was the St. Petersburg conference, 133 countries, lots of deals done, lots of backroom talk, further solidifying the involvement of the BRICS group of nations, 69 additional countries wanting to join. Then we had this strange G7 meeting where you had, it wasn't G7, it was the Pope, it was the heads of IMF, World Bank, OECD.
Even the head of Argentina, Milei, was there too.
Yeah. And the heads of large number of countries outside the G7. And if you looked at their communique, it was really, this is the world that we are going to develop. Anybody who does not agree with it, we will fight you. That was basically the guts of it. So,
yeah, that's what Maloney said, right? He said, we will make Russia surrender if they don't agree to our peace
yeah. Excuse me.
So who are the elites in the West? Certainly it can't just be one monolithic group. You have your neocons, you have your imperialists, your globalists. What's kind of like your mapping? And what do they want?
Old money, old family money. If you knew where they were positioning their money, you would be able to answer everything that's going on in the world.
Do you know?
No, I wished I did. I'm trying to find out.
You and me both.
But, their history is that they played both sides. So it's really they who are pulling the strings.
Yeah, oftentimes people will reference like
who was behind what families, who was behind Obama? Who is behind Biden? It's old money.
And it stretches back hundreds of, probably even thousands of years.
Yeah. And what I found interesting was some months ago, Obama, unannounced, drops into 10 Downing Street. Why? Probably to warn the British Prime Minister what's coming and how he should respond.
But that's strange, Simon. Obama's not the president anymore. I mean, why does he
No, he's not the president anymore, officially.
But
who's pulling the strings?
But he's still got the clout, yeah. So let's go ahead and look at the Pacific a little bit more granularly. Just the other day, Putin had a big meeting in Pyongyang, and I've never seen that many Russian flags plastered all over a city like I did with that. What's kind of the objective there between Putin and Kim Jong-un?
Well, it's part of developing an opposition to the Western alliance. Putin and Xi are configuring their own alliance, whether it be North Korea, Iran, Iraq, the countries that America attacked in the Middle East, leaving a total mess, and the same in Europe. So missiles have been relocated from Russia into Belarus. just as American missiles have been relocated into Poland and other Baltic states. It's the two sides are strengthening their own alliance countries.
Is there any way we get through this without a World War III scenario? Or do both power players on both sides want this war to restructure the world?
Well, one scenario was suggested to me, which is that Russia preempts any attack by NATO by making such a destructive attack somewhere that the Western alliance say, enough is enough. Let's back off. Give us time to rebuild our reserves and tactics for a relaunch of our attack on the other system, the alternative group of countries. Give us 2 or 3 years of peace, but it won't end the war.
In conventional attacks against one another, that could very well be minuscule compared to the asymmetric attacks that could be coming down the pike, i.e., an attack on the banking system, or an alleged attack on the banking system.
Well, I think
false flag.
The two can come together, because what is quite possible is that we will have a cyber attack which will shut down your entire banking system with knock-on impacts on airlines and electricity grids. In order, in a few months' time, to reopen the banks and introduce central bank digital currencies, another form of control on you and I.
So is really the play here to hold things physically, whether it be cash, gold and silver, any form of assets? Possession is 9/10 of the law in this scenario?
Yeah, I think, speaking personally, it's a time to raise cash, take risk off, wait until the early months of 2025, when commodities and equity markets will have fallen by around 40%. Then, because governments will be re-stimulating, go back into the markets, back into base metals, back into equities. But you don't do it as a long-term investment. You do it as an 18 to 24-month trade, because inflation takeoff, bond yields exploding to over 10%, will then crash the global economy. So it's a trade, be a profitable trade, but make sure you're not the last guy on the dance floor.
Yeah, and this is just your opinion, not financial advice, by the way.
Sorry?
No, I said this is just your opinion. It's not financial advice for the audience.
Oh, no, it's my opinion.
Yeah, just getting that disclaimer out there. Excellent. So where do people... So you have this big global war beginning to gin up. where do people go to? Do you just find a country that's neutral from either side? Is that really the go-to place? Like a, I don't know, like a Uruguay or something? What's kind of your opinion there?
Every household has to look at its own position. Do you move your family who've got their schooling? It's a very difficult decision. Those that can relocate, where to? Big question. It's a very personal. I mean, I've had guys that are saying, I'm selling out of America. Where do I go? Australia is a favorite place. I said you should have a good look at the UAE. It's an attractive country. It's growing. It's safe. It's autocratic, yes, but it's very pragmatic. You have no crime. You have an attractive tax structure. Everything works.
Do you think they'll get caught up in a war with Iran?
I think the UAE will be the Switzerland of the Middle East. Connections between Iran and the UAE have been very long standing and pretty close.
I see.
Even if America and Israel decided to attack some of Iran's infrastructure, I don't think UAE or Saudi will get involved. America has a large naval base here, military base here. So, no, I think the UAE will come through any war pretty well.
Gotcha. So I want to take this back to something you said earlier in the show. You said that the United States is trying to protect its hegemonic power through the dollar. Now we do know of this, this globalist agenda, so to speak, where they want to implement a one world currency. Would that be a separate currency from the dollar, or where would that kind of fit in? Where does the dollar fit into all of this?
Less and less. The rest of the global south simply has grown tired of being bullied by America through the dollar. Basically, America said, if you don't do what we want you to do, we will use the influence of the dollar, if not our military prowess, to make you do what we want you to do. So they've grown tired of that. They've grown up. They've matured. And now there is visibly an alternative structure being developed, which a large part of the world wants to join, which comes back to what I said at the beginning. It's this development that worries America and why they will use every trick in their toolbox to stop happening.
Understood. Well, Simon, I appreciate you coming on your maiden voyage and waking up 3:30 a.m. This was a fantastic interview. If you guys enjoyed this interview, right, go Simon, go in the comments. Simon, any concluding thoughts before you wrap this up?
Well, I think I've already said it. It's a time to take risk off the table and put risk on the table in the early months of next year for a 18, 24 months super run, but don't be the last guy on the dance floor. But if anybody wants to make contact with me, they can through simon-hunt.com.
All right. Any other socials you want to put out there before we wrap things
No,
up?
I think
That's it.
that's it. It's enough.
Yeah. So I heed your warning very profoundly. That's why I found Miles Franklin to be our go-to gold dealer for this channel. If you guys want to take advantage of special pricing on Miles Franklin, email them at info@milesfranklin.com and say Capital Cosm sent me in the subject line, and you'll get a special pricing sheet. No commitments, nothing. Just check them out. It's always important to have physical gold and silver in your possessions. And if you enjoyed the show, be sure to give us a like, comment down below. Go, Simon, go. Or if you agree or disagree with any of his takes here, also subscribe to the channel. 85% of you guys who watch this channel do not subscribe. So let's flip that ratio around. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.